Contos Perances by J. Marx de Carvalho, produced by Pedro Sabarano, created from scanned images of public domain material. From Google Book, search Perances Stories for Pinto Barbosa, C. Publishers, Rua, 13 de Mayo, 1889. Works by Marques de Viperance. Stories by the same author. The Monitor, Dream, a poem, 86. Lava, a poem, 1886. Paulino de Brito. Profile with a facsimile and portrait of the subject, 1887. 1-volume Hortensia, a naturalistic novel, 1888. 1-volume Judith's Book, Verses and Stories for Children, 1889. 1-volume. To be published, Love Stories, 1-volume Sister Maria novel, 1-volume Theodorico Magno Profile, 1-volume J. Marx de Carvalho Perances, Stories for Pinto Barbosa, C. Publishers, Rua, 13 de Mayo, 1889. To my brother Antonio, dearest brother, in the midst of waiting for lunch, that hurried meal ordered at the most modest hotel in Pinheiro, we took a walk through the forest under the shade of the large, trimmed trees. The ladies had remained in the hotel's sitting room, sharpening their appetites with the enticing smell of the stew coming from the kitchen. My walking companion was an elderly man of 50 years, with a square face and long, greying sideburns on tanned faces warmed by America's sun. We met at the small gangplank of the boat that would take us from the city to Pinheiro. It had been less than 2 hours since we'd first met, yet a great familiarity had already formed between us, that easy, intimate, fleeting familiarity that arises among people who travel together. We were still on board when my charming companion, sitting at the rail, told me he was French and had lived in Par for many years, intending to stay there until the end of his life. I felt increasingly drawn to this man, whose existence I'd been unaware of just hours before, now intriguing me intensely for reasons I didn't care to explore. When we stepped onto land, climbing the ladder of the bridge, I invited him to join us for lunch, and he accepted with a laugh, that hearty laughter of a man with a simple soul free from duplicity. It was he who had suggested the walk into the forest to give the hotelier time to prepare our meal, which I expected to be frugal and sad, given the conditions in this remote land. I readily accepted his kind offer with that lively, joyful zest of someone who has spent months bound to the daily grind, taking every now and then a beautiful day to rest a bit, basking in the peacefulness of an outskirt town, lazily reclining on the fragrant grass of our vast and magnificent forests. And off we went, following a winding path below a towering canopy of coloured branches in a dark green that was uniformly interrupted by the bright red, yellow, and white of various wild flowers, whose petals had slightly wilted from the sun's rays. Here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho, entwined with the subtle and exciting scent of vanilla, whose long pods hung from the dark and ancient branches of those majestic trees. Birds flew swiftly in a gentle rustling of wings, releasing tiny, strident cries of joy. Moment by moment, just a short distance away, grey or green lizards fled in fear, snapping the dry leaves that crunched beneath their feet. And far off in the distance, high up over patches of sky washed in a pale blue, black robes cut through the air peacefully and slowly, drifting as if in a loving contemplation of the land that sustains them with its putrefaction, its infamous and repulsive residues. Suddenly my companion said to me, "Let's sit here. I'm sure you're tired from this long walk." He didn't have any foreign accent. He spoke like a true Pyrenees. He had lain down on a thin layer of green grass, face down, with his neck stretched, and the large Chilean straw hat descending over his nape. I imitated his gesture in front of him. We remained silent for several minutes. He gazed at the ground, his nostrils fluttering, as if drinking in long, sensual breaths that earthy, wild aroma the land exhaled. Suddenly, not knowing what else to say, I asked, "Are you married?" He stared into my eyes intently with an inquisitive expression, eager to understand the depths of my thoughts. He answered, "No, I was. Now I am once again single. I am a widower." "Why?" he replied, confirming what he said. I am a widower, and I've been doing very well in this new state of living without the concerns of a married man who has a family to support. It's foolish to get married." He fell silent again, looking into my eyes once more. A small, enigmatic smile played on his upper lip, etch-deep creases that ran obliquely from corners of his nose to the long grey strands at the bottom of his moustache. I didn't fully grasp what those words meant, emphasized by such a smile. He seemed to have guessed my doubt, because he said, squeezing my right hand as if drawing me in completely, "Aren't you curious? Do you want to know who this old migratory bird is that lives in your country and always brings joy to your heart, face, and gapes?" He added, smiling warmly, "It's a very long story of mine. I'll be straightforward. Do you want to hear it? You won't lose anything by listening. On the contrary, I believe you will gain something from the moral that comes out of my words, after giving me full credit for my actions." As soon as he finished speaking, you will verify that the saying holds true: misery does not pay debts. You will be certain that in this world the best way to enjoy good health and live peacefully is to have a calm heart like fair weather and a big stomach like Judge Delfino. Now turn your ears towards him and listen attentively. I sat down. He did the same and began, still smiling. When I arrived in Brazil, I had with me several dozen, from the tales of Rees, an inheritance from my father, who died when I was a boy. I established myself, quickly finding a partner who had capital equal to mine. We made rivers of money, which my partner spent consciously, squandering it on a mere and old Spanish woman from a city hotel. One beautiful day we failed because of these extraordinary expenses capable of depleting even the fullest coffers of a crisis. You would think I fell in love because of this, that I became sad, downcast, ill-disheartened, without the will to continue in my honored work. Oh no, my friend. My spirit is resistant to sadness. My heart is too large to become small and diminished by such a trifle. A few rees that I had earned from a certain transaction after the shipwreck caused by my partner's madness to buy you some fake golden jewelry, smuggled goods, and with a voluminous cheap cargo, I set off for the Madeira River in order to exploit solely for myself the ingenuous simplicity of the rubber tapist. His calculations were correct. Months later, I returned to Paga and acquired a larger cargo, which I took again to the remote regions of the upper Madeira, where the alligators and jaguars always respected my delicate position as an innocent foreigner who needed protection, who should never be offended in a friendly country. He fell silent. In his wide mouth, with its frank and careless expression, there was that eternal mocking smile, that sympathetic smile that drew me towards this man with all the enormous force of a robust affection just beginning. He lit a cigar and continued to cut to the chase as 6 years after our bankruptcy I returned definitively to Pa, bringing a solid fortune in good round rees, treasury notes, at the bottom of my bag. Immediately I fulfilled the obligations of a duty. I paid all creditors of the bankrupt estate without exception. One of these firm debts was for a little bird that my partner had bought for his Andalusian Venus, I still had enough money to establish myself again, this time without a partner, so as not to be harmed by anyone. Fate willed that I fall in love with a beautiful Pyrenees girl, full of exciting dark flesh and large rounded hips, divinely the daughter of a police subdelegate. I married her a few months after seeing her. She lacked education. She was stupid, but she possessed the conviction of beauty in her forms, the power of sensuality in her gaze, and I loved her. What did it matter to me the rest? For 2 years, I lived in the arms of an unlimited happiness. Luiza, my enchanting, beloved wife, day by day gained a step in my boundless late affection, and more revealed to me a splendid secret of her magnificent Creole beauty. It was a delusion, a sweet madness and purifier, that love which I dedicated to her with all the vibrant virility of my body and soul. The little house we lived was for me a desired Capua, where my languor found peaceful, well, being in the arms of the seductive Luiza. The following day, which many regard as an enigma. Here is the English translation, preserving the name Carvalho. The terrifying one presented itself to me openly and pleasantly as the unwavering reproduction of the past eve and the present day. Hours of intense love so sweet and good, as you were loved by the naivety of my spirit. She fell silent again, with her face transformed into a spiritual bliss. But she gazed at me, and then that ironic smile returned to tug at the ruby tip of her thick, manly lip. And she continued, after lighting her cigar that had gone out, I had complete confidence in Luiza. Never did I entertain the idea of treachery on her part, passing through the tranquil mind of a husband who trusts. How could those eyes, so beautifully clear and bright, that mouth with sweet lips that gave such delicate kisses, be deceiving? Holy simplicity of careless souls! My spirit was the mirror reflecting my heart, and I believed I saw Lisa's soul within it. It was truly mine that would soon be rudely wounded by facts. "Yes, I tell you," she said. Luiza was a demon, far from being an angel as I had imagined her in the benevolence of my unlimited love. With a creative and passionate imagination, she fell in love with a fat cowhand from Moravia who had come to town, and on a beautiful day, as I returned from dinner, in the evening she was no longer there. The thief had stolen all the money I had at home and fled with the aforementioned cowhand, as I soon learned from neighborhood gossip, leaving me humiliated as a robust, complete, brave man, and, in my valuable opinion, not entirely incapable of fulfilling the primary purpose that drove that passionate, material, and voluptuous woman. And what do you think I did to punish her? That I pursued her with my country's laws in hand, that I sought her out among the bulls of Moravia, where she was surely resting, languid and sensual, in the arms of the Cyclopean cowhand, that I publicly ridiculed her ignorant wickedness and the irreparable dishonor to my name. No, my dear, I let her go unbothered. Look, I even sent her some shirts and undergarments that she had forgotten during her hasty escape. See how accommodating I was. See what holy kindness mine. The unfortunate woman died a year later, a victim of Beriberi. Well, to show God that I am not entirely wicked, I had a sad requiem mass for my wife's soul celebrated at the Church of Carmo, to which I attended with respect and pity. She fell silent, without any emotion on her face or in her voice. She spoke as if it were about time or the color of the sky at that moment, with the utmost calmness. And then her wicked little laugh popped out of her mouth, peeking over her top lip as if it were a living testament to the tranquility of her soul in the face of all the extraordinary events that had passed over her without emotionalizing her. My companion, my strange convive, stood up and, gesturing to me, indicated that. Here is the translation. Preserving the name Carvalho, he accompanied her, following in the direction of the settlement, humming this odd stanza from day, and night by Lykoff Saku, my wife, whom God took away. She was unfaithful to me every day. Nothing of that broke my spirit. I took it all cheerfully. The convalescent was with Dada, Alves de Costa. She was pale and sad, leaning lightly against the screen of her compartment on that debut night. Her eyes, as black as the silk dress she wore, wandered aimlessly through the audience, indecisive, never settling on a single point. She looked like one of those melancholic characters from George Sand, fantastical and idealized, yet beautiful even in the falsehood of her creation, brought to life by a mystery and led into that theatre room where the beauties of fashionable young women and the austere overcoats of burgesses shone under intense gaslight. And she was always pale, leaning lightly against the screen of her compartment. A smile played on her lips, softening the expression of her sympathetic face. A mischievous cousin of hers was playing with her fan. Anyone looking at that compartment would feel a surge of pity in their soul for the melancholic sadness emanating from that place, where she directed her dark, deep gaze towards the audience, whose atmosphere was becoming increasingly filled with scents of delicate lace handkerchiefs and perfumed, subtle clothes worn by young ladies. And that enchanting child, always sad, leaning against the compartment screen, bore on her pale face traces of suffering, which made her all the more endearing in the eyes of the soberly serious bourgeoisie under the intense glow of the chandeliers. Disappointment, Mrs. Dona Joaquina was one of those unpayable spinsters who, dreaming of love and discovering timid passions in the playfully mocking words of young men who pretend to court them as a distraction. She had a face wrinkled and soft like the rind of a ripe guava, spotted with yellow marks they call freckles. She hid them in part under thick and repeated layers of rice powder, always purchased at Loja Mariposa, where owner Afonso, the charming Afonso, sold it to her with much praise and attention to the quality. She wore out of style dresses, poorly made with some stains, in which the showy trimmings took center stage, a peculiarity of Mrs. Dona Joaquina. Her face revealed 45 years firmly entrenched among the wrinkles of aged skin, although her hair, black and lustrous like the sweaty face of a negro from Minas, might have shown evidence of a younger age. People who lived closest to her whispered unflattering phrases about her pride in being a lady presentable enough and worthy of seeking a good marriage, she thought, and confided to certain close friends. There have always been gossips in the world except for the silencer. That's why one of those friends, after having an argument with her, withdrew from their intimate company and spread the news that our character dyed her hair if it didn't receive daily attention with a sponge soaked in dye. It would be unbearably red or already grey. Some listeners doubted, supposing that statement was part of a conspiracy driven by recent enmity. Others believed it, naturally. Mrs. D. Joaquina had a mediocre education, merely sufficient to know her duties as a single woman in terms of moral education. When it came to intellectual education, she read with ease, and some prosodic stumbles the sentimental letters from 2 or 3 former lovers she had had. These readings were a beneficial purge for her spleen, as she was an older lady now stuck in the unenviable position of an aunt. Oh, Poor Mrs. Joaquina lamented not having married Guise, the wealthy head blacksmith, who had once become fiercely enamored of her charms, when those charms in small quantities still protected her from her 22 years of existence. She had rejected his love, dreaming of marrying a young, rich, and elegant baron, as she had once read about in a novel by insipid Ponson du Terrail. However, the baron never appeared. Now it was too late to remedy the situation. Guides, in a moment of lucid reflection, decided to live in calm and economical celibacy, keeping only Belisaria, his cook, a fat mulatto woman who served him delightful treats filled with cheeky little quips during moments of love, followed by shrimp cakes and delicious Bacuri preserves as dessert. Mrs. de Joaquina had no definite news about her other former lovers after she had spontaneously broken off. 'Tis with them, it was vaguely said that one had gone to negotiate on the Madeira River and never returned, perhaps enticed by a charming Yaye Ra. About another, it was only known that he had returned to his native land, Portugal, to savor the delicious chicken dishes of the Beira region during long winter evenings, when the hearth crackled in the large, blackened chimneys. These dishes were so glutinously praised by the renowned poet Joao Pena. Thus Mrs. D. Joaquina was open to possibilities, and, to put it all together, she now nurtured secret and sweet hopes of captivating the rebellious heart of Francisco de Natividad, the elegant owner of one of the best stores on Rua dos Mercadores. However, he did not seem to share the same intentions, as he listened to her laboured sighs without steering, without even blinking, in an impassivity akin to a mummy. She laid traps for him with love. She sent him flowers, made him presents of intricately designed towels and embroidered pillowcases, seasoned his coffee when he visited her family's home, brought him glowing matches for his cigars, gently stroking his fingers as she revealed her passion. Yet nothing moved him. Mrs. de Joaquina internally rebelled against Francisco when alone in the moment when she wanted to surrender herself fully into his cold embrace. She reviewed in her memory all her actions related to that love's smooth progress. This was the state of Mrs. D. Joaquina's heart, when Natividad introduced her to a nephew of his, had recently arrived from Portugal. The young Lisbon gentleman, with an elegance so natural, charmed the noble spinster, and she immediately sympathized with him. In less than a month, Mrs. D. Joaquina had role as a sincere friend, a thoughtful admirer of austere character. To reciprocate his kindness, she showered him with greetings indulged in the most refined delicacies. Led by her feelings, here is the translation of the text, preserving the name. Carvalho eruptions from her volcanic heart led her to love her nephew with the same fervour she had earlier loved her uncle, Francisco de Natividad. Soon the kind gentleman was surprised by Mrs. D. Joaquina's loving manoeuvres, and, judging it necessary, he informed the relative about her affection so as to obey the dictates of duty. Both laughed heartily at the new folly of the ridiculous lady, or because he brought bronchitis germs from Lisbon, or because he caught a cold in Pa. Raw fell ill, paled, plagued by a slight cough. And one evening after dinner he felt suffocation followed by acute pains in his chest, which radiated to his shoulder blades. With a desire to spit, he bent over a spittoon and expelled some live blood. "Holy God, what do I see?" exclaimed the uncle, alarmed. "Already a doctor. Quickly," he continued, running terrified through the room. The physician called examined him and asked about his past life and the climates he had lived in, then advised him to leave for Portugal as soon as possible. Overwhelmed by such terrifying advice, the kind Francisco de Natividad immediately sent his nephew by ship, which left Pa 6 days later. As Rawle bid farewell to Mrs. D, Joaquina, she crying genuine tears of sorrow and longing, took a sealed red letter from her pocket and gave it to the sick man, saying, "Take this, Rawle. Keep it. When you reach Lisbon, read it and do as I ask. But don't open it before God, please." "Yes, my lady. Your requests are commands for me. Goodbye." Upon arriving in the city of Tagus, Rawle was on an auspicious path to recovery. However, he began his treatment with caution, safeguarding himself from anything that could harm him. These useful distractions led him to forget about Mrs. D. Joaquina. Months passed. Rawle recovered. He was fat and strong. Following the doctor's recommendations not to return to Brazil, he sought employment on the continent. He found a job that seemed appealing. He became a traveling salesman for a renowned commercial house, going out to collect debts in the provinces. The night before his first trip to the Alentejo, he was arranging some clothes when, reaching into the pocket of his overcoat, worn only while traveling, he encountered an object with his fingers. He took it out into the light and saw a crumpled and dirty letter. He immediately recognized it. It was the letter from Miss Joaquina. "Ah, what a forgetful person I am!" he exclaimed. "Hey, what must this incomparable lady think of me?" Full of curiosity, he tore open the envelope. "My dear friend," he read, "I have something to tell you that has long troubled my lips without, however, having the courage to say it. I love you. I love you with all the fervor capable of my fiery heart." Here is the translation of the text. Preserving the name Carvalho, she wrote the romance The Christian Charity by Eskridge Rawle Thorpe. "I beg you to write me right away, telling me if my love was accepted by you. That which was genuinely hers, only hers, Rawle knew it well. I eagerly await your response, with which my friend will send me a dozen Circassian water for me to give to a friend of mine. Always at your disposal from your eternal Joaquina." Rawle burst into a loud laugh after finishing reading that model of spelling with its peculiar terms and syntax, but soon became more serious and thought, "Well," he said, "only her hair enchanted me, because it was so black and lustrous, and that colour of a zivich. What a disappointment! The Serene by Chabertou, Dr. Augusto Meira, in his modest single-room apartment. Joao lay in bed reading a collection of stories by Armand Sylvester by the soft light of a spermaceti candle. 9 o'clock rang out from the other side of the Capybara River at the detention house, spreading an imposing breath of tranquility through the air that made passers-by hasten to their respective homes. The north wind, blowing in from Olinda, entered the room and then moved on to Joao's bedroom, agitating the light within the photo mobile in the invisible flutter of the breeze. A piano melody vibrated through the neighborhood. A fanatic admirer of music, Joao closed his book and listened attentively. It was the opening notes of Schubert's Serenata, that magnificent musical poem that she loved above all compositions. In one leap, he found himself below the bed, outside the room, at the counter of one of the windows on their third-floor humble apartment. He leaned against the grill, with his relaxed face in his right hand, preparing to listen to his favorite piece. The street was now deserted. Reflections lined the sidewalks, like strange guardians of public peace. A crescent moon spread a tiny opalescent light across the azure grey sky among crowds of trembling stars. And from a nearby house, piano voices emerged, mingled with the light from open windows filled with gas lamps. Like all sentimental music, that serenata has Schubert's sonata, this extraordinary quality. It captivates the spirit of the listener and transports them to the center of tranquil and nostalgic meditation on great past events that are always, whether painful or joyful, a grateful comfort for the soul. That is why Joao, right from the beginning, let out a sigh and then, little by little, immersed himself in the vast, silent and fragrant forest of his old episodes of love, when he could still see and hear daily the enchanting maiden who was to become his wife. It was also for that reason that the young law student recalled with so much longing the masterful performance his fiancée gave of the masterpiece by the illustrious German maestro performance, full of feeling, interpreting the smallest secrets with sweet voluptuous murmurs that gave melancholy to his spirit and gentle pains to his body. Joao imagined himself back in Pa. Here is the English translation, while preserving the name Carvalho by her beloved companion's side, near her piano, in the perfumed quiet of the empty room. He was enraptured by the sound of that splendid fantasy. And soon, through an imaginative transformation, the unknown neighbor's piano took on a unique, intimate sound that moved him deeply, bringing 2 tears to his eyes' corners. For this reason as well, his soul seemed to witness a peaceful scene from the neighboring house's walls, a snapshot of his past that one brought him great joy, and now had a poetically nostalgic air, like a Watteau painting. That picture came alive. This tale was written in 1886. The young woman mentioned is now married to the hero of this story and can boast of being the most pious, kind-hearted, beloved, and loyal wife, with the added advantage of being the most dedicated and gentle of all mothers. It was Christmas Eve. 9 o'clock had just struck on the porch clock. A steady, happy silence hung in the room where the family sat together in a pleasant gathering around the sofa. From the streets came strong wafts of fragrant breezes and fleeting sounds of guitars played by joyful passers-by. Occasionally, a voice or cry reached the room, revealing that people were out walking through the city, trying to celebrate Christ's birthday. The conversation in the room was general. A beautifully enchanting little girl sucked on the end of a feeding tube, cradled in her virtuous mother's arms, who, while supposedly talking with her extreme husband, kept her expressive eyes fixed on her daughter's face, floating in a sea of tender and spotless mercy like a maternal kiss. Contemplating this Rubensque scene, Joao thought of the joys of Homshi, who was once a poor orphan, a wretched lover. Meanwhile, Del, his beloved fiancée sitting beside him, spoke sadly about an unfortunate woman who that morning had received from his kind hands clothing and sustenance for her children. And dominant in the middle of the sofa, with the gentlest expression on his spiritualized face, a smile venerably etched on his lips, was the old Antonio, with his silky, long white hair and beard, addressing his youngest son, Theodore, advising him to take up honorable work, pointing out various scenes from his past commercial life as examples to follow. A radiance of virtue emanated from that group. Their faces revealed the old, enviable tranquility of those content with their fate and full of confidence in the future. Suddenly, in a silence between 2 points of dialogue, a voice rose from the street, accompanied by a guitar. Let everyone celebrate this night. Come to an unequaled party, for tonight nothing is mended, because it's Christmas Eve. Tonight nothing is mended, because it's Christmas Eve. The guitar wept in a minor key, accompanying the refrain. The voice of a delightful tenor immediately caught the attention of those in the room. This blessed night belongs to here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho. Those who have love. In the Bethlehem manger, the Lord God has come into the world. And a new sorrowful refrain on the guitar. So, young men and women, surrender to pleasure while you are not old enough for your brows to be lined with grey. Third and final melancholic plainchant on the guitar. As the last verses were spoken, old Antonio raised his head in a burst of energy, with his nostrils flaring, the rings on his head trembling over his shoulders. "Fools," he exclaimed, referring to the singer, whose voice was now fading into the distance at the end of the street. "Come here and see if the old don't have loves and pleasures too. Come witness this scene, and afterwards tell me if I do not love my dear daughters, my kind Braga, my Theodore, and that innocent one who sleeps here under the blessings of my gaze." A sob gripped him. Dahlia rose, radiant like the embodiment of affection, and with compassion and purity. Like a ray of sunlight illuminating the face of an ancient statue, she went to kiss the forehead of the old man lovingly. "Tell him not to grieve," he begged soothingly, "that he should not give importance to such foolishness. Everyone knew perfectly well how deeply he loved his family, and what gentle pleasures he drew from that love. And besides, that night was a celebration. As the unknown singer had said, it wasn't worth getting sad about." To the side with sorrows, he concluded with a smile. "As a pleasant distraction for everyone, I'll play Schubert's Serenata on the piano." John had already risen. Anticipating this outcome, he ran to the piano, opened the piano, the desired music on the shelf, and lighting the candles, sat down next to the small stool that Dahlia was occupying. And then they began the first melodies of the Serenata. John closed his eyes, entranced by the senses as he listened to the beautiful piece, so well executed by the young woman whose artistic soul comprehended the secrets of poetry embedded in Schubert's music. A figure at first fluctuating and indecisive, but soon taking shape, appearing in the foreground, was sketched on the canvas of his imagination. And then a young man with a bandolier in hand emerged beneath the flowered balconies of an elegant castle which rose in the middle of a German landscape where oaks rustled on the edges of tranquil lakes, over whose surfaces great herons glided gracefully, ruffling their white feathers in regal majesty. And his voice was as gentle as a magical song from an Amazonian yara, felt like a paternal reproach, sweet like a passionate kiss. Poppy-coloured drops of honey distilled from his lips, the melody of Schubert's music, which would fall with a softness akin to balm on the enamoured soul of a beautiful young castle maid. Hidden among the folds of the curtains, the voice of the amorous minstrel had a certain melancholic quality, a mark of sorrowful poetry that moved John so deeply in view of the scene his imagination was painting for him that he couldn't help but hum softly with a half-smile, accompanied by Dahlia's correct and felt interpretation. "She Tulane and tend my pine." Dahlia played the final notes of the Serenata. John woke from his reverie, raising his eyes to the pianist, whose here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho. A sympathetic face broke into a playful laugh. Standing, leaning against the piano, was the revered Antonio, his countenance illuminated with an expression of indescribable joy. It seemed like he was silently blessing them from his open lips, completed by the gesture of his hands raised and spread out in space. It was the father blessing the happy future of his beloved children. At this point, the cherished memory of the young student returned, looking out from the third-floor window of his modest apartment on one of Recife's streets, as the neighbour's piano also echoed the enchanting conclusion of the serenata. Joe felt moved by that highly inspired music, which revived a grateful memory of his fortunate past, now that he was absent from the beloved native land, where everyone possessed a flower of affection. He raised his eyes to the sky, in need of freeing his spirit through the infinite vastness of space. In the blue firmament studded with golden glows, the crescent moon glided towards sunset like a fleeting joy. Tiny clouds followed calmly and ethereal across the void, casting grey shadows on the street's pavement. From the opposite shore of the Capybara River, a soldier's voice rang out, shouting alert to the sentinel. Then, as a spontaneous expression of gratitude, Joao's spirit soared into the infinite, reaching power and passing through the city before kneeling in humble prayer at the modest stone tomb marking Antonio's revered resting place, the trembling father of his bride. What a good husband! Juvenal Tavares once said, "You shall not covet your neighbour's wife," God's commandment. 3 years had passed since their marriage. They did not have children. They lived happily and tranquilly in their little house on the road to Braz, where the front wall was painted white, with the morning sun playfully dancing upon its scintillating surface, evoking a sense of great inner pleasure for anyone passing by. He was a 40-year-old man, an amanuensis in a secretariat, obese, ruddy-cheeked, with a flattened face and bushy, greying beards. The youth he once had stormy and spent in Orgeach had completely turned his hair white, falling over his face, where numerous wrinkles crossed his plum-coloured skin. She was 18 years old. Using an old romantic expression, she sported a charming, rosy face, bright eyes, and a mischievous smile. She had a tan velvety complexion. A delightfully enchanting smile descended upon her red lips, revealing 2 rows of teeth, whiter than those of a Newfoundland dog. Her body was flexible like the stem of an angelica plant, agile and possessing seductive movements that deeply impressed more than half a dozen idle wanderers, those puffed-up suitors who are abundant everywhere. Her daily routine was always the same at 8 in the morning. After a modest breakfast, Mr. Bonifacio would brush his solemn high hat with the sleeve of his overcoat, give his wife a loving nudge, and leave for work with a step characteristic of a public servant, immovable and measured. Elvira would accompany her husband to the doorstep, tenderly touch him, and return to the balcony to give some instructions about dinner. Everything was set for the evening. Here is the translation of the text. Preserving the name Carvalho, mealtime would find Carvalho sitting at his sewing machine, which provided him with a substantial income for his daily expenses. The earnings from these jobs and Mr. Bonifacio's wages combined to create a reasonable monthly sum, allowing them occasional luxuries like a box at the Peace Theatre, a bond ride on moonlit nights, a new dress for Lady of Nazareth, dozens of pistols and small birds at St. John's feast, and other delights that cheered up the portly clerk and gave his enchanting wife opportunities to satisfy her natural vanity as a beautiful young woman. As fate would have it, Mrs. Bonifacio had her suitor-slottish young men who, let's be honest, she didn't pay much attention to. Among these lads, one stood out, Jacinto, a boastful conqueror lion who spoke with his elbows, incredibly foolish and ignorant of everything except the art of daring flirtation. Jacinto had fallen in love with Elvira just days after her marriage during a ride to Benavides. From that point on, the unlucky suitor would spend every afternoon outside Mrs. Bonifacio's house as Elvira went to the window, while her husband played cards on the veranda with the corner tavern keeper and their neighbour. As he walked past Elvira, Jacinto would send her a smile and a greeting. Mrs. Bonifacio would respond politely, but always maintain a serious, dignified demeanour, never returning his gaze. Days turned into months, and Jacinto was punctual for his visits, which seemed to pique Elvira's interest as she began to glance out the window at regular intervals, just as Mr. Bonifacio, the tavern-keeper, and their neighbour would start their stepping and baking on the veranda. It was that Mrs. Bonifacio had a fairy spirit, one that couldn't be satisfied with the slow, cold affections of old Mr. Bonifacio. Nevertheless, she hadn't intended to act improperly. She indulged in what she called a distraction, more out of vague curiosity than any desire to commit a crime. Jacinto was not a man who lost his temper easily. He calmly watched this waste of time, convinced of the old saying, soft water against hard stone will eventually wear it down. He had faith in the future and believed that this intriguing love problem would be resolved to his advantage. One afternoon in midsummer, Jacinto walked by and noticed, to his surprise, that his beloved wasn't at the window. He glanced both ways on the street, but didn't see anyone, so Bras Road looked like an abandoned old cemetery. Not a living soul was in sight. Feeling embarrassed, he turned to leave when he spotted a young mulatto girl leaving Mr. Bonifacio's house. He ran after her and asked, "Where is Lady Elvira, my daughter?" The mulatto girl stared at him in shock and, bending her head to her chest, silenced herself with the index finger of her right hand. "Come on," Jacinto urged, offering her a coin. "Tell me, where's Lady Elvira?" The little girl felt the coin touch her breast, and, gathering her courage, whispered, "She's gone." Contact with the coin reminded him of the sweets from his neighbourhood, and he said, still shyly, "It's inside and Mr. Bonifacio." He left. "I'll give you another nickel if you go deliver a letter to your lady. Do you want?" "I do." Jacinto took out a letter he had written long ago, which he hadn't dated or signed out of caution. He handed it to the mulatto girl, and also gave her another coin. He then continued on his way. Elvira didn't respond to that letter, which revealed the great love Lovelace from Pa felt for her. He didn't give up. He avoided passing by Bras's Road for 2 days, after which he returned, following the path close to the window. He shook another letter from her waist. He repeated this game for a week. Finally, Elvira couldn't take it any more. She sent him a letter filled with fears and worries, in which she confessed that Jacinto wasn't indifferent to her, but she had to give up that love because her position as a married woman didn't allow for such freedoms. From then on, despite these worries, letters kept passing between Jacinto's pockets and Elvira's bosom. There was one afternoon when Elvira confronted the physical appearance of Mr. Bonifacio with that of Jacinto. That confrontation and the memories of many romantic readings led to their illicit correspondence. For several months, the love between the two had no other expression than those platonic missives. Jacinto's temperament was more demanding. One December afternoon, Mr. Bonifacio got off the bus in front of his house, returning from a visit to his section chief. As he crossed the doorstep, he found the mulatto girl leaving in a hurry, barely hiding an object between the folds of her dress that caught the attention of this curious old man. "What are you carrying?" he asked. "It's nothing," she replied in that peculiar, sung-like voice characteristic of Par residents. "Don't lie. I saw something." "Eh?" Mr. Bonifacio exclaimed, pulling her by the arm and taking possession of the object. It was a note. He opened it, focused his glasses on it, and read, "My friend, after tomorrow, at midnight, my husband will be attending the Rooster Mass at St. Anna. I pretend to be sick so that I can talk with him and learn about this news. He promised to tell me. Come at 1 a.m. Be careful. Let no one see you." Bonifacio was seized by a wave of anger. He felt like killing unfaithful wife, but then reflected and came up with a sudden idea for revenge. "Take it, go on," he said, handing the note back to the girl, and went inside. Approaching with light steps until he stood in front of the scribe Bonifacio's domicile. It was Jacintho, who knocked swiftly and quietly on one of the windows. A faint rumble responded from within. Jacintho trembled with joy, anticipating the pleasures he would enjoy in Elvira's conversation, when suddenly he let out a cry, jumping to the side. It was the esteemed Missa Bonifacio, who emerged from behind the bush where he had been hiding, sternly rebuking the young man who had dared to court his wife. When Jacintho leaped into the street, Bonifacio used his remaining agility to follow, continuing to fiercely shove him in a frenzied manner. The poor boy cried out in pain. No one came to his aid. Everyone had gone to the Rooster's Mass. When he was exhausted and his arms refused to continue, the honourable scribe, casting terrifying glances around, told Jacintho, who was lying on the ground with his bones nearly crushed, "Go away, you troublesome fellow. Have more sense. Don't fall into the trap of courting married women again." And he retired to his home, where Elvira, terrified, stood at the slightly ajar door. All Souls' Night, the cemetery Santa Isabel was filled with visitors, all dressed in black, walking slowly and solemnly among the graves. It was 8 o'clock in the evening, under a gloomy sky, mirroring the profound sadness felt by those who remembered their relatives and friends forever buried beneath the earth. Long rows of candles cast an intense light that extended into the darkness of the surrounding forest. The air was perfumed with flowers gently placed on top of the graves by friendly hand sand, the mystical scent of burning wax. In the distance, to the right of the chapel, a band played a sombre funeral march in a minor key, its melancholy melodies causing the old pious women to sigh, longing for a different life unknown beyond that dark firmament where they felt the omnipotent and unconditional power of divinity rule over them in all its majesty. Meanwhile, in waves, crowds of people inundated the cemetery. At that hour it could barely contain them, so those who feared being run over left disgruntled, murmuring indecencies. At the gate on the outside, carriage drivers freely conversed with the black-clad women sitting in front of sweet trays, illuminated by lanterns placed on a crimson-stained wooden table. Repulsive beggars, dressed in filthy and foul-smelling clothes, wept for alms, trying to convince the charitable visitors of their worth. Some vagabonds, leaning against a rich marble mausoleum, cast lascivious glances at the girls entering with their mothers, their steps trembling with fear as they greeted one another or someone they knew with a nod of their heads. Further on, in a dark corner, a full-figured mulatto girl, wearing a dress with a daring décolletage, whispered sweet nothings to a black man with intimidating visage, dressed in a new suit and wearing a peculiar tall hat. In stark contrast, not far away, a poor woman, poorly dressed, rested her elbows on the rusted iron fence of a badly grey lit marked by 2 candles. In the glass casings, from her eyes fixed on a crown, perpetual purple, tears ran down her cheeks, sliding across her face to the delicate leaves of the grass growing between the cracks in the faded tiles. There was no doubt she was a widow paying tribute to the memory of her late husband with years of loving and tender coexistence on earth. To her left, gazing at a miniature photograph enclosed in a black frame and suspended at the center of a cross on a tiny grave completely covered in jasmines, daisies, Japanese anemones, and madder plants, one saw a lady with grey hair, motionless and silent, evoking past scenes of Pligeon, hearing the strains of the orchestra continuing at the sombre funeral. However, the sky filled with a soft, glowing light. Large dark clouds sliced through the azure, ferreted firmament towards the city's outskirts. A cold, murmuring wind, like a sob of troubled souls, caused the nearby foliage to rustle, evoking chills in the superstitious girls present at the cemetery. Now the orchestra fell silent. A preacher climbed onto a pulpit set outdoors under a large, dark canopied tree and delivered a somber homily in a deep, cavernous voice with wide, tragic gestures about fleeting earthly happiness and eternal celestial bliss. The women mothers, daughters, wives who listened to him remained quiet, very serious, their eyes widely fixed on his tanned face. However, deep within themselves, at the back of their consciences, they uttered a curse against that happiness that had robbed them of the company of their beloved ones. A man with a balding head, walking hand in hand with a young child, a tender orphan, boytoned away nervously, his shoulders hunched and tears streaming down his face, then fled towards a quiet tome whose fence bore this piercing phrase, "To my wife." In the sky, clouds drifted away, vanished like fleeting joys or expelled pleasures, rising into vast, fantastic lacework of various marriages. The moon appeared as an immense and excruciating longing in serene, tumula majesty, imposing vague sorrow on everyone's heart. Torches and candles dimmed, turning into fireflies flickering over the tombs under the diaphane moonlight which continued to illuminate the preacher's remembrance of God's omnipotence. The streetcars filled up with passengers. Minutes later, they were on their way down the Independence Road, packed with men and sorrowful ladies. Many men got off upon reaching Nazareth Square. The square was brightly illuminated and adorned with cheerful decorations. That night marked the penultimate day of the annual festival. So the same men who had just been mourning a friend's, brother's, or father's memory now descended to the heart of popular festivities, seeking boisterous conversations, invading gaming houses driven by the demonic and terrible fascination of roulette, downstream to Dotdara, Gaspar Coaster. The canoe glided gently along, propelled solely by the current. Seated at the prow, smoking a long pipe, the caboclo gazed with an indifferent glance at the tall, slender acea trees and the long leaves of the banana plants bathed in the clear green light of the dying sun, which was disappearing behind. Here is the English translation, while preserving the name Carvalho, Ilha das Onças. In the shade, under a straw tent, stood the young gentleman, fanning himself with a red feather vented next to the young lady, peeking out through one of the small lateral slits. At their feet, Murmur, the dog, dozed off, with a scarlet piece of tongue hanging to the left side between its half-visible teeth. The pungent smell of salt water filled the tent. Parrots squawked in the nearby island's forests. Melodic bird songs reached the boat, carrying a gently melancholic sweetness that made the two travellers smile with joyful tenderness. What beautiful scenery, Antonio! Yes, you were right. I told you you'd love this trip immensely. When do we reach our destination? At 9 o'clock? That is, in 3 or 4 hours. It's a pity we're arriving so early. You're right, we're both so excited. And they kissed each other in a burst of extraordinary pleasure. The caboclo, who had been staring at them for some moments, turned his face away, embarrassed, feeling the heat of shame as an equatorial blood rush bubbled to the surface. He took a long drag from his pipe to calm himself down. The others, the newlyweds for Antonio and Luiza, were betrothed. They had married 15 days prior, experienced under the tent a sense of indescribable well-being as they gazed upon that majestic tranquility on the Tocantins within the boat. They congratulated each other, with their eyes full of affection, for escaping the bustling life they left behind in Belém, always surrounded by visitors whose banal conversations held little interest for them. But now, how would they live happily during this 2-week getaway amidst the quietude of the rural plantation alone, strolling along the river without intrusive companions, gathering crabs from the mud, washing each other's hands in the murmuring blue water of the Igarapes? What feast they'd have at dinner time, eating fish Luiza caught, and packers, plump rolls of meat hunted by Antonio in the plantation forests, suggestions whispered by the soothing ambience that seemed to surround them on the river prompted lively conversations between them. They laughed and spoke without noticing the sun no longer glimmered on the bright edges of the current, and thus they ventured out towards the center of the canoe, enjoying the refreshing and fragrant breeze that ruffled the recently harvested sails. Always sitting at the prow, smoking his long pipe, the caboclo now gazed towards the west, as if mentally confiding with the sun, which had left a trail of crimson in the sky where nacre colored violet, azure, and leaden cloudlets gathered chaotically. On the opposite side, nightfall emerged gently, mathematically extinguishing the flickering twilight bit by bit. The bird chatter ceased on Ilha das Onças, which had faded into the distance. Only the rhythmic notes of a carachue's song reached the canoe, greeting the night from a small island close by. Look at my watch. José Antonio commanded the caboclo. It's 6:38, sir. Then let's leave here, daughter. Let's enjoy some fresh air. They stepped outside. A sonnet by Paulino di Brito, as witty satire of Julius Caesar, with a voice of Argentinian timbre like warm water falling into an ornate golden bathtub. "Ah!" she exclaimed. And she stood leaning against her husband's shoulder, entranced, facing the picturesque scene before her eyes. Wide in that spot, nestled by the breeze, the river embraced numerous shallow islets covered in lush vegetation that faded into dark tones, almost indecisive, at the horizon's edge. A peaceful glow of a tabernacle reigned everywhere under the steel blue sky, where stars began to sparkle like precious stones on an ancient queen's cloak. Not a cloud occupied any space in the heavens at that moment. In the distance to the right of solid land, a small light flickered. The river water, at the end of its course, snaked along the side of the canoe in a mournful murmur. Suddenly, in the solemn silence, a cry of a nocturnal bird rang out. "Light the lantern, José," Antonio said to the caboclo, who immediately obeyed, returning to his usual position at the prow, smoking. Antonio and Luiza had sat on the bag in the center of the boat, between 2 stacked sacks of flour and large jars filled with blooming rose bushes. As if refreshed by the wind, Luiza felt a chill. She trembled. Her husband went to the poop to fetch a blanket, covered her shoulders with it, hugging her very close to his neck. Lovingly, he then sat down beside her. The darkness was profound. From their position, they only saw on the prow a red point like a carbuncle, the tobacco burning the caboclo's pipe. He had become invisible in the density of the shadows. Antonio and Luiza felt at ease in that solitude. They began to converse in low tones, very close, about thousands of things that compose their pleasant past memories. It was an indescribable happiness for both of them to be able to float like this away from the perils of their short courtship, from the long years he had spent silently loving her, from the emotions and impatience of the day of their wedding, when the hour was approaching for the altar of Saint Anna to unite them. They exchanged sly giggles, stroked each other with love in a stimulation of the senses, a spontaneous movement unconscious, perhaps full of affection and voluptuousness, certainly united their lips in a prolonged passionate kiss, vibrant like a young coir. The old caboclo, hearing it, trembled, changed positions. He began to think about past happy times with his beloved late mulatto, whom he loved so much, amidst the wild vegetation and grandeur of the Amazonian forests. And a deep sigh, expressing a most painful longing, responded to that kiss born from two lovers' mouths in the silence of such a beautiful Parrain night. Meanwhile, the canoe glided gently downriver, carried by the current. Here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho's silently drawn curtains. A lamp with dim, milky glass scattered soft light around, without a flicker, in a solemn stillness that lent an air of majesty to the silence of the room. 2 pairs of white silk slippers lay stretched across the thin blue carpet at the foot of the bed, as if in a yawn. On top of the bed, abandoned, a garland of orange blossom flowers was half hidden beneath a delicate batiste cloth with an embroidered monogram. 15 minutes had passed since the bride entered the room, very pale and trembling, accompanied by her maid of honor, and she flung down onto the lazy chair her elegant corset and the bodice that twisted like a labyrinth. For 15 minutes, young Paula, completely overwhelmed by the mysteries facing her in the life that was about to begin, had allowed herself to slide down the fine sheets and rested her beautiful head of dark Perrin's hair on the soft pillow. And just 10 minutes ago, her fianta, her beloved Alfredo, entered lightly, full of great longing, his lips drawn together in a slight rictus of satisfaction and joy. Just moments before, she had opened the curtains that closed with a modesty and murmured softly, deeply moved, "Do you permit?" Now, while they slumber, lovingly entwined, dreaming of paradisiacal felicities, a delicate fragrance of flowers floats through the air in the room, wafting from large porcelain vases where multi-colored roses bloom luxuriantly, reflecting in the mirrors and peeking curiously at the bed of quietly drawn curtains. The realized marriage, that day's wedding, was the epilogue of a lengthy courtship of 6 years, rich with many interesting perils, such as sudden indispositions, arguments, and ill feelings for several months over nothing, and then suddenly, under the influence of some beneficial spirit, reconciliation with abundant, passionate expansions, tender and affectionate reconciliations that bound them temporarily in an embrace. Paula's father was an elderly, retired capitalist from Brazil, plump and rubicund, sweating profusely, and exuding the satisfaction of a rich man who lives contentedly. He had created for his daughter an ideal marriage with a bachelor. Similar aspiration, undoubtedly modest, led the old man to seek out certain social circles when his daughter turned 15. Without his wife died during childbirth, delivering a weak and enviable child, he left his daughter in the salons and went looking for gaming tables to pass the time. For many months, they both roamed on a true pilgrimage in search of a marriage until fate finally intervened and presented them with an elegant young man who had arrived from Pernambuco just days before, holding a scroll conferring upon him the title of bachelor-in-law. Dora. Alfredo felt captive to Paula's graces. Her dark, velvety skin, her eyes two onyx balls set in jasper almonds, shadowed by long, silky lashes, her long, ebony hair floating on either side of her fair young shoulders, that beautiful torso with opulent breasts resting against the support of youth. All about her captivated his enamored spirit into the bonds of a passion as sincere as it was deep. But most of all, here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho. What most enchanted him, what most thrilled him with delicious ecstasy, was the smile that appeared on her lips, spiritualized and brimming with bliss, caused by those pearly white teeth that adorned her pink gums. When Paula smiled at him, with two dimples on her cheeks, so close to his face as if she wanted to magnetize him, he was captivated. One afternoon, after spending hours admiring the bride's teeth, he returned home with a perfumed soul from pleasure. So inspired, he sat down at his desk and began writing a poema, task he had never attempted before. The poem was filled with words like seductress virgin, divine angelic spirit, and a bizarre mix of broken giant feet, causing quite a stir among the rules formulated by Feliciano de Castilho. Finally, the long-awaited wedding day arrived. As Alfredo prepared to leave for the church, his mind was consumed with thoughts of the bride's teeth, those small, very white teeth that had so captivated him. He fantasized about a plan which just the memory of it sent shivers and goosebumps down his body. He promised himself that the first kiss here with his wife would be on those teeth, right in the middle of her mouth. Those teeth became an obsession for Alfredo. No matter where he looked, he seemed to see Paula's little teeth smiling at him lovingly, tempting him to steal a kiss. The vest he put on that moment felt like a set of teeth biting into his shoulders, near where his heart pounded with yearning. And when the godfather appeared at the door, reminding him it was time for the church, Alfredo was so lost in thought that he embraced him with emotion, murmuring, What a beautiful set of teeth you have." At the church and during the lavish feast that followed the religious ceremony at Paula's father's home, as they engaged in lengthy and tedious conversations in the drawing room under the glow of many candelabras, Alfredo could only think about the bride's teeth. He sat buried in thought, with a meditative forehead, causing guests to whisper among themselves with knowing smiles while clutching their napkins in their hands. "What do you make of him?" they asked. "Drinking on his wedding day. Is that even acceptable?" "What a scandal," someone exclaimed. "He deserves it, I know." And so the comments continued, all laced with inappropriate and greasy suggestions. When the last guest left, Alfredo sighed with contentment, flattered by the congratulations he received, accompanied by expressive pinches on his arms and plump cheeks. He was now just waiting for his new in-laws to leave, as the old father-in-law, impassive like an abbot after dinner, sat in a corner, staring blankly at the smoke from his cigar, while trying to fight off the force of the alcohol's vapors that rose to his brain due to his excessive drinking during the meal. Here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho do Rosario, the merchant who never hesitated to lend him money at 30 interest during times of financial strain. He, Alfredo, should feel the impatience gnawing at his back, suddenly pondered his father-in-law. With a malicious smile, he should not get irritated, however, as Paula's godmother was still in the bedroom, preparing his toilet. It was all natural. He well knew how these things were, having gone through them himself. What a good time that was, and what a beautiful night of bliss he had in Sancho's arms. A seductive odorvalence like a beautiful demon. Poor thing, how much she missed the memory of his wife. How happy they had been in an unchanging peaceful friendship, abundant in pleasant loveliness and eternity. Doc. Alfredo dos Anjos should strive to emulate it, to bring happiness to that innocent and physically and morally flawless creature who was to be his wife from that day forward. He should cherish her, not overload her with work, so as not to exhaust her. Her gentle nature and his wealth could provide them with a carefree existence, conducive to obesity. And he delved into lengthy contemplations about the good life is a sectary of debauchery. He was. At that moment, the godmother appeared, bidding farewell immediately, intending to retire to her designated room to spend the night at the bride and groom's home. Alfredo didn't want to hear any more. He sprang up, embraced the old man, and ran to the bedroom, thinking of Paula's beautiful teeth with increasing insistence time and again. The nuptial alcove on the morning following the wedding day. Through the slightly ajar window, a ray of sunlight penetrates the room, caressing the multicolored roses hanging from large porcelain jars, their wilted petals shyly averting their gaze from the mirrors, as if embarrassed by the amorous noises that had been echoing intermittently from that bed covered with respectful curtains throughout the night. Far away in the courtyard, roosters sing merrily, greeting the sun and paying court to the hens, who scratch the ground happily. A wave of happiness seems to fill the room. The light from the frosted glass lamp grows dimmer, flickering menacingly, threatening to extinguish itself. On top of the commode, a garland of orange blossoms retreats further under the costly cambric cloth, as if ashamed or wiping away tears that the spirit of purity might have shed upon its odorless petals. At the foot of the bed, lined up on the fine blue carpet, white silk slippers gape open in an expression of revulsion at their prolonged immobility, appealing to feet that should wear them. Suddenly, a deep sigh escapes from the bed, the yawn of one who has just awakened. The curtain parts slightly to let in the young groom, whose lips bear a genuine smile of inner satisfaction. And inside, in the half-shadow cast by the lace, as beautiful Paula still sleeps, semi-nude, in the unconscious audacity of sleep. Here is the translated text with the name preserved as requested. Carvalho was agitated. Alfredo looked around, beaming with joy. Upon seeing the ray of sunlight kissing his plants, he trembled with delight, exulting in his fortune in a spell of great happiness to come. But suddenly, stunned and confused, his skin paled greatly, and he clutched his hands tightly, shaking all over, with his face transformed, his hair standing on end from the blinding light. At the foot of the bed, upon an elegant jacaranda gueridon, lay a false set of teeth revealing a synthetic mouth, made of some kind of dough. And that monstrosity belonged to Paula. He recognized her by her small, evenly cut teeth. Then, feeling immense pain throughout his being, with his spirit prostrated by the violent emotion, Alfredo staggered, sobbing, and collapsed at the edge of the bed, washed in tears, murmuring in a whisper, "I've been robbed, I've been robbed." Poem in prose to Musio Javrat, those tenderest verses, imbued with ideal and spontaneous inspiration, had made him understand that the poet loved her. unwittingly, she began to love him too. When, by chance, they met at his cousin's house, she would crouch, feigning sorrow while she suffered, and savored simultaneously, and then embrace him longingly, and then with that abstract persistence of true passionate ecstasis. The poet realized he was not indifferent to that pale, sad young woman whose gaze held the fluid sensuality of ardent passions, and for some reason he fled. A month passed without him visiting his cousin's house to see her. Then, filled with self-disgust, he went and found her even paler than before. Her eyes, those tempting, sparkling, eloquent eyes, were even more beautiful. He felt pity for her in a moment of solitude in the room where the scent of a bunch of sweet grass in a jar hung before an old lady's portrait with wrinkled forehead and gentle gaze. He confessed his love for her intensely. She, Bedina, the pale woman from the album that had received those tender verses of ideal and spontaneous inspiration, smiled and trembled and murmured only an almost unintelligible sound. From then on, happiness united them in loving nocturnal conversations in that same room. Years later, the poet had to embark on a journey. Their mutual promises of fidelity were long, as should have been the absence. As he gave her a goodbye handshake, Bedina almost collapsed from the anguish that ran through her heart. By chance, the poet forgot about the enchanting child to whom he had vowed love before the portrait of the old lady with the wrinkled forehead, while the sweet grasses' fragrance filled the room. She waited for him for months, for years. Oh, the piercing pain of long expectation. She still waits. In the afternoon, anyone passing by her small courtyard might see her sitting under a large jasmine bush along a vast yard, her gaze gently fixed on an album's pages, murmuring quietly words of longing reproach. Those tenderest verses, imbued with ideal and spontaneous inspiration, had made him understand that the poet loved her. Ossianic paraphrase to Frederick Rossado. Beautiful, seductive Malvina, say. Here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho to your nighttime refuge descend from the rocky crag where the north wind roars around you. Draw near to me. The furrows of the dead's ghosts trace fairy paths across our torrents. I hear them pass through the eddies. Their parched-voiced voices are the only sounds that disrupt the majestic calm of darkness. You, whose white and delicate hand once sent melancholic moans into Luther's harps, try yet again to console me with your poetic and sorrowful hymns. Wake these dormant strings, sing, O Malvina, and revive my spirit whose flame was extinguished by relentless years. Come to me, O gentle Malvina, in the darkness of this long night that saddens me, for you have deprived me of the tenderness of your songs. When the stream flows down the hill and tumbles after the storm, under the radiant light of the sun, the hunter listens with pleasure to its soft murmurs, shaking his damp hair. Thus your sonorous voice, Malvina, enchants the friend of fallen heroes. My chest swells, my heart palpitates. The past unfolds before my eyes. Come, O Malvina, no longer wander in the midst of darkness. The village pastor to Father Dora. Lorn Meneschal, it is Providence's care for that poor village to have that young priest with a swarthy complexion and a loving gaze like a counsel from Jesus. His modest table is always at the disposal of beggars. His open door welcomes travellers, and his lips murmur consolation to those who suffer. Many nights he is called upon to minister religious aid to some sick person in any one of the villages that make up the Serranos parish. Then he springs into action, mounts his horse, and sets off into the mountains at a gallop, skirting the dark precipices amidst rain and cold, unmoved as a hero, content with himself, feeling joyful at fulfilling one of the mysteries imposed on him by his profession, so perfectly understood by his beautiful soul. Nothing daunts or intimidates him, for he is certain that all those simple mountain folk love him sincerely and respect his counsel of peace and kindness. When the abolitionist movement began in Fortaleza, the upright priest took up the cause of the enslaved ones in his humble parish on Baturitier Mountain. In a few months, thanks to his efforts and the boundless sympathy he inspires in everyone, none of the villages under his jurisdiction had a single captive. They were all equal. When he leaves home, heading for the small church with its white tower reaching up into the firmament atop a verdant hill, the children playing at the doors rush to kiss his hand, and the mothers greet him respectfully, murmuring a blessing. On Sundays, during his sermon on the gospel, I've seen him on different occasions make the tears well up in the eyes of the listeners with the unction of his words. He governs them all with his irreproachable way of life, so rich in good examples. Nothing possesses him. He gives everything to those in need without ostentation, naturally. Oh, blessed be you, Providence, for that poor village, O charitable priest with a swarthy complexion and a loving gaze like a counsel from Jesus, to the son, to Fernando A. da Silva. Oh, you who here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho. The sun rolls above our heads, brilliant like the shield of our fathers. Where do your rays come from, O sun? Where does your light originate? You walk in your majestic beauty. Seeing you, the stars hide away in the heavens, pale and cold the moon sinks into the waves of the west. Alone you stay, O sun who could follow your course. The oak trees fall from the mountains. The very mountains are mined by the years. The ocean rises and falls alternately. The moon eclipses itself at the bottom of the skies. Only you remain constant. You celebrate incessantly in your radiant journey. When the world is dark with storms, when thunder roars and lightning flies, you emerge radiant from amidst the clouds and laugh at the hurricane. But alas, in vain do I shine upon you. The old bard no longer sees your rays, whether your golden mane flickers among the clouded east, or your flashing light trembles at the western gates. Perhaps, like me, you only have one season, and your years will have an end. Perhaps there will come a day when you pale in mid-journey, and the dawn in vain waits for your return. Therefore, rejoice, O sun, in the strength of your youth. Old age is sad and repugnant. It resembles the clear moonlight that disappears among clouded skies as the wind sows distant withered herbs, when misty fog envelopes the hill and the shivering traveller trembles on deserted paths. To translated from Ossian. Remember Apollino di Brito, do you not then feel a single spark of anger in your chest towards me? I asked, amazed, gazing at her with all my heart moved by the pleasure of recent peace. No, she confirmed, laughing, shaking her golden head that tempted with its ringlets, where the crazy circles of her hair fluttered merrily in an opulence and a prodigal abundance of enchanting effluves. And all her small person, delicate and tender, seemed to bloom the gentle flowering of her graces, of her divine, triumphal gifts amidst the power of enviable youth. Therefore be blessed upon you, pure and fair, beloved virgin, who has so much goodness in your soul, as many are the cunning seductions of your beautiful face, crowned with those golden hairs whose circles, crazy and merry, flutter in opulence, in adorable prodigality of enchanting effluves. I exclaimed, seized with great enthusiasm, drawing her modestly towards me. in a surge of gratitude, still all moved by the pleasure of recent peace. And thus was my first audacities justified and forgiven, which had manifested itself in stealing a kiss, that little fugitive kiss, from that blessed virgin, pure and fair, whose delicate body seemed to bloom divine graces in gentle flowerings of powerful, enviable youth. The roses seemed to stir in their green branches, peeping maliciously at my lover's enthusiasm in the face of the cunning seductions of her charming face. The text continues. Indolent on my shoulder, with the beautiful rings floating tranquilly upon her, concentrated along the perfectly crafted swords. A sudden temptation assailed me under the thatched roof that sheltered us with its fragrant jasmine flowers, amidst a silence that wrapped us in an embarrassing indecision. My forehead had already rested on her blonde head, which gently reclined on my shoulder, indolent and focused, when a powerful desire suddenly hit me, driving me to capture another kiss of fleeting, chaste kiss on the damp lips of my gentle and tempting lover. But she sprang up, vibrant and nervous, reaching out her hand menacingly towards her head. She stamped her foot in a burst of incipient annoyance. "If you dare again, I won't forgive," she declared, still echoing with the indolent allure that preceded it, as she slipped away from my nervously extended hands faster than those sweet moments of pleasure she had granted, while resting her forehead on my shoulder, with the beautiful rings adorning her lovely head floating tranquilly along the perfectly crafted swords. I remained there, sad and focused, under the fragrant thatched roof, in the darkness, recalling the joy of finding peaceful harmony after stealing a kiss, the first kiss, small and chaste, from the plump lips of my blessed virgin. The roses seemed to stir on the green, invisible branches, as if in sympathetic lament for the futility of my youth before the weems of that little blonde head, with its triumphant, captious graces, there which had only accepted and forgiven my initial boldness, still so innocent and reserved. The Price of Peace by J. Pinto Bosa, my friend Ernesto, lit a cigar, adjusted his pince-nez on his sharp, amused nose, and settled more comfortably in the vast, plush armchair before me. He began, "Want to tell you about the big case I briefly mentioned at the table earlier, without being able to tell it all due to the presence of those ladies. Picture to yourself the most beautifully divine and divinely captivating woman that could possibly exist, tall, slender, with a body possessing exquisite, triumphant curves, a morena skin, soft as velvet, black, brilliant eyes like two mysterious cauldrons filled with intoxicating potions, very black, wavy hair perfuming the air with the scent of wild vanilla, an air of charm, a sovereign presence with a captivating elegance capable of ensnaring us, and in a whole series of crimes that the human mind is capable of formulating during dark moments of reflection and sinful ebriatic thoughts. A stunning revelation, a perfect example of the unique woman, the incomparable woman, the archetype of excellence in attributes, the civilized manifestation of our legendary Amazonian women. And all this, coupled with a cultivated spirit, a perfect illustration of erudition, captivating conversations bubbling between brilliantly white teeth, small and even, carved from pure ivory, a whiteness like milk, and set in a beautiful coral, gleaming like the rosy lips of a minuscule mouth shadowed by a delicate moustache, the perfection of seduction, the essence of seductive allure. Did you imagine it? Well, that's how Ma Cass was, the wife of General Bandera, an old man in his 50s with immense material wealth manifested in countless hundreds of thousand Ries notes, deposit in the main banks of Brazil, Now, after what I've been telling you, as the blue smoke of this cigar capriciously draws spirals in space, how could her husband love her, seeing her so young by his side, completely given to her love? From the timid, startled kisses suddenly given in the recesses of any empty room's window to the complete shivering and perfumed undressing, very close and warm, that she presented to him in the mysterious peace of the reserved alcove, high at night, with his tall stature like a lily rising among snowdrifts of lace, diffusing scents that seemed intoxicating, irresistible, a fascination, that dual existence of burning love. Mutual caprices were satisfied with zeal, with pride, as if one dedicates oneself to every sacrifice to win and estimate through constant proofs of admirable disinterest. I confess I have not yet seen the repetition of that enviable existence of affectionate rapture, she on the decline of life, and she in all the wonderful flowering of her 25 years. She spent whole hours contemplating them, absorbed in the admiration of this alien happiness that made me fortunate. It is certain that a perfect harmony of soft existence, rich in affections, has the power to spread a joyful overflow around itself, an excess of its own. Many years had passed since their marriage, when Mark has celebrated her 15th anniversary, and not a single moment did regret reach them for having bound themselves forever through a premature sacred bond. It was their present life as a faithful reproduction of the day when, for the first time awakening in the dimness of the discreet alcove, they gave each other, between two still timid kisses, the charming treatment of husband and wife. Truly admirable, don't you think? But there came a day when the first cloud of an indisposition floated, gloomy and dark, across the beautiful blue sky of their joyful, tranquil happiness. It was a true misfortune brought about by a mad caprice on the part of the general's lovely wife. She had the audacity to refuse him for the first time, to satisfy him, and Mark has suffered the harshness of her cruel rejection right in her heart. Long strands, unending tears slid from her large, languidly tempting eyes, tracing them with force, circling them with the sad marks that unhappy people are accustomed to when crying. But this manifestation of weakness only lasted for a few hours. While the old general, locked in his private room, paced the floor in an unsteady manner, he began to regret, almost brutally, resisting the enchanting serpentine attack of his beloved wife. Then came the reaction after the crisis of silent, abundant tears. A few fits of magnificent indignation, very concentrated and silent, reached him at last, whispering to him mentally harsh means to inflict on her husband memorable lessons in just retaliation. Mark has promised to rise above herself, to be as rude as the general had been brutal. Oh, my dear friend! The lesson was severe. Poor General Bandera felt it again many times when, at the end of the first week, Marquette's resentments still forced him to spend the nights alone in his room, a sad loneliness, a frigid widowhood. Here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho. The old military man tried to endure the harsh necessity, resisting it with valiance, subduing it at the core of his being. It seemed impossible that he, the illustrious soldier whom the Paraguayans feared so much years ago in the wild solitude where our army had inflicted some bloody battles against Lopez's guerrillas, could not have the strength to overcome himself. But soon after, those enthusiastic resolutions weakened like a veil crumpled and pulsating along, massed as it suddenly lacks the refreshing breath of the whispering breeze. The general wished to capitulate to the extreme of his forces. A regret weighing heavily due to necessity, reached him after these momentary resolutions of superior resistances. Impossible for that poor old man's spirit, so foolishly captivated by the enchanting graces of a woman. Indeed, he capitulated one night when the abandoned corridors no longer echoed with the steps of slaves and faint light filtered through the dim glass of subtle lamps. He cautiously left his hiding place and, with a heart pounding violently, approached his wife's room. At the door he paused and undecided. A rumble of stirred water came through the gap between the tightly closed wooden leaves, mixed with a subtle aroma of freshly crushed japa and mangarona, essentially crushed into opoponax, diluted in the sweet warmth of the water. Marocas was taking her usual night bath, with the door open, in the simple, careless innocence of a woman who thinks of nothing evil. Perhaps the old man wanted to retreat, perhaps blushing at the step he was taking. Unwittingly, he peeked through the door's crack and saw a beautiful body like amber and milk emerging from the bathtub in the middle of the room, vaporizing the subtle warmth from her fresh pink meats. Beautifully seductive and deliciously youthful. A brutal desire ignited his blood while his nostrils flared, eagerly inhaling the scent of exciting plants. He pushed open the door, ran to his wife's side, and fell at her feet, weeping, supplicating with every caress and kind word, begging for forgiveness, requesting a truce, asking for peace sealed with the ardor, a delicious and ultimate compensation. She, however, Marocas, impassive and unmoved, as she enveloped herself in a fine sheet of transparent cambric in a graceful blush of an impeccable maiden, stretched her arm towards the door, and, showing it to the general, said, "Retire, sir! Be worthy of me. Conquer me if you wish to appear in this room as a beloved husband." And he had to leave, recognizing the impossibility of continuing his resistance, which could only be detrimental. In the subsequent days, old Bandera struggled to find a strong enough means by which he could rehabilitate himself before his wife without finding an expedient that would triumphantly save him from the terrible collision. He offered her presents many and very valuable silks, jewels, and fine stones from all over par. There was nothing she wouldn't buy profusely to please the capricious Marocas, secluded in a strong fortress of embarrassing reserves. Nothing worked but to augment his own despair, which also dissolved a tiny point of flushed shame due to the capitulation he was submitting himself to, with all the meanness of petty lowliness. However, a fortuitous event came to save him. Here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho in distress when the suffering weighed on him like the brutal force of a granite block bound to his deformed shoulders, consumed by all sorts of secret ailments. Coincidentally, at that very moment, General Bandera was invited to be an examiner of mathematics during the special commission exams of the General Delegation of Secondary Education in the court municipality draining and disorganized creation that saps all autonomous strength from our provincial laies, reducing them to modest, insignificant salary schools and devoid of any value compared to the superior academies of the empire. But let's skip this educational digression, my excellent friend, and continue with the narrative I promised. The general accepted the invitation with extraordinary joy, being well acquainted with General Bandera's unyielding, Rugcatonian traits. Eager to maintain his tradition as a stern examiner, he prepared to the Lahedis on the scheduled day when a surprise his wife, Marcas, appeared in the room, dragging a long, flowing veil made of batista, adorned with delicate lace around her waist, accentuating the most appealing firm curves imaginable. Trembling, the old man, who had just lit a cigar, forgot about the side where he had placed the light from the phosphor, and awkwardly shoved it into his mouth in the opposite direction from which he intended to smoke. The contact of fire on his tongue made him jump up, creating a considerable distance between him and Ma Cass. Little Bandera smiled at the absurdity of the situation, but, biting her lips, red as poppies, she maintained the necessary seriousness and moved closer to her husband, reclaiming the space that had previously separated them. Then, extending a visiting card, she said, "Shall you be examining mathematics today, General?" "I will." "Yes." "Well then, this young man will take your place."
"What?"
"Didn't you hear me?" "Yes." "Just watch how he does." "Mathematics isn't my strong point." "I'm not very skilled." Without paying attention to the general, who was trying to protest against such an intrusion or a similar complaint about an impossible scandal to his severity, the beautiful Ma Cass fled, running on her toes, dragging the tail of the veil behind her, spreading an indescribable scent of white clothes, good essences and firm, young female flesh in the room. Here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho, said to Laranjara, whose written proof could not have been worse. It goes without saying that the young man confused science with all the courage of an ignorant Preparatorian. Yet, as he was representing the beautiful Morocco in the absence of Minerva, the general gave him a good mark and did his utmost to ensure the indulgence of the other examiners, saved the unfortunate from the guillotine. Upon returning home, the general retired to his room when his wife appeared, always seductive and radiating grateful fine perfumes, Russian leather and Cape jasmine. "Then?" she asked half, laughing. Approved, affirmed the general, hanging his head, weakened, perhaps ashamed of his weakness, blushing at not resisting the temptation. "Beautiful!" "Beautiful!" cried Morocco, leaping into his arms, kissing him frenziedly, presenting to him the blossoms on her face, to the tip of her nose the lovely poems swelling under the fine fabrica of the lace adorning her hair comb, situated over her chest. She opened her arms, embracing him as if within herself, in a great nervous embrace, the penultimate manifestation of her intense desire to reconcile with her husband. She gently yet persistently urged him towards the upholstered sofa position next to the general's desk, caressing him with her gaze, her voice, and her lips stretched in a wobbly, voluptuous murmur. But the old man suddenly stopped, as if turned into a statue, immobilized, silent. Only his eyelids trembled rapidly. Eventually, 2 thick tears rolled down from his eyes, very large, very slow. "What's wrong?" she inquired, startled, kissing him on one ear, playfully and temptingly, infantilizing her voice, which soon took on a sweet harmony. "I think this piece cost me dear," he replied. "Scandal? That approval." "Ah!" she exclaimed, embracing him tightly, reclaiming him, guiding him back to the sofa, filled with pleasure, smiling strangely. After a moment spent pressing her forehead against her husband's greying hair, both collapsing onto the welcoming sofa, whispered in his ear between a rumble of clothing, "What had is good comes at a price." Inconsistent story to Dr. Franklin Tavora for several days. Colonel Fonseca had been sad, apprehensive, and taciturn. The cheerful surroundings of his farm no longer held the power to evoke for him that former delightful smile with which he greeted each morning sunrise from his large room's window. Those in the house were searching for the reason behind this sudden change in the old man's demeanor. Whispered conversations during siesta time yielded no enlightening results regarding these unplain sorrows. All questions presented by Metlux were with the cold reserve of the elder, who maintained a disheartening silence. There was no reason for Colonel Fonseca to be so sorrowful. The farm was progressing, thanks to the magnificent weather that had reigned for 2 years. Cattle were gaining weight, and all cowboys were content with a disposition for work. Thiago, the colonel's only son, hadn't yet noticed these gatherings of his father. He was entirely consumed by a passion as ardent as sincere, preventing him from paying attention to anything happening elsewhere than within his own heart. And Venancia, the beautiful maiden who every day compelled him to go. Here is the translation of the text, preserving the name in Carvalho. There was a nearby villa that, while deserving such selfish yet excusable dedication, had a daughter from an old farmer who embodied legendary kindness and recognized integrity without any stain on her reputation. Hardworking, she took care of her younger siblings, making their clothes, tending to them, and surrounding them with care, deeply concerned about the physical well-being of all those small beings entrusted to her by her mother when she passed away. However, anyone who could peer into the colonel's soul would have been amazed to find that the source of his sorrows was precisely the love for his son. It is true Fonseca felt great discomfort seeing Thiago, day by day, growing closer to Venancia from the village, as the farm workers called her. Anyone who approached the colonel's bed when he slept his short nighttime naps could often hear him utter these words: "Such a marriage is impossible." One afternoon, as Colonel Fonseca was locked in his room writing to his correspondent in the capital, Thiago appeared, saying he needed to speak with him urgently. The old man shuddered, perhaps foreseeing that his son was about to broach a topic he had been avoiding for a long time. Making a violent effort over himself, he murmured, "Speak whenever you want." Thiago sat on the edge of the hammock and remained silent for moments. Old Fonseca looked at him with wide, open eyes, an expression of curiosity and horror. He trembled slightly, his nerves on edge. "The devil's gout wants to visit me," he thought. Nevertheless, Thiago wiped his neck with a handkerchief and began, "Father, the matter I come to discuss with you is too important for me to waste time and words in unnecessary circumlocutions. I'll be brief because I'm dying to know what your response will be. You want to get married," he declared. Colonel Carvalho contained a gesture of indignation and replied, showing indifference, "Well, son, if you insist, go ahead. I don't oppose it as long as the chosen girl is worthy of becoming your wife. Oh, if such are the conditions she sets, I can assure you that I'll marry soon," Thiago replied confidently. "She's good and serious, kind and honest, hard-working and full of dedication. I believe I've met few girls like her in Par during my 6 years studying at the seminary, and lucky there." "I congratulate you for that," said the colonel, feeling sharp pains in his sources, with an accelerated heart, but maintaining a semblance of calm. "But then, who is she?" Thiago smiled mysteriously, his face radiating intense happiness as he exclaimed, She's Venancia from the village, my dear Venancia." The old man stood up, moved by the gesture, assuming this was a way for his father to signal his approval. Thiago also rose and embraced him, but the old man, slowly raising his arm, halted Thiago's enthusiasm and whispered, trembling, "Wait for me, son. I've known about your love for Venancia for many years." Strong reasons, which perhaps you'll understand one day, prevented me from favouring these loves, and also from opposing them boldly. He feigned ignorance of everything, in the hope that the years would cast boredom upon your captive souls, intertwined by what I thought was enthusiasm for the new. I witnessed my mistake with immense sorrow, as you remained faithful to your word, just as Venantia did to hers. This could have been a great happiness if it weren't an enormous misfortune. That is to say, it would be a precious pledge of your upcoming fortune if the object of your passion were not Venantia, but another woman. Look, Thiago, without seeking to inquire the truer and pressing reason and that compels me to hurt your heart, forget about that girl, stop visiting her, leave Maraja, go to the capital or to Rio de Janeiro or any distant city where you believe it easy to find a woman to offer your hand. But why, father? Thiago asked, stunned, his heart weighed down by an immeasurable sorrow, feeling his father's words eroding the happiness he had built over so many years with deep love free from malice. Because it is necessary, the old man retorted vehemently in both gesture and tone. And know this, if you cannot satisfactorily explain the cause of such opposition, I will only take your words as originating from a reason that makes wavering and worthy of pity. Thiago was already beyond himself, wounded by the great portion of egoism every man has within him. Ungrateful, the old man murmured, sinking into a seat and weeping copiously. Behold the death of your heart, as you desire it. Listen to me. Through the open window one could see the vast field on the west side of the farm, covered in uniform vegetation of crested grass bathed by the sun. Calves leaped about playfully, while large, gentle oxen, very fat and slow, grazed tranquilly on the short, dry grass, swaying their long tails in a mechanical rhythm. In the distance a black bull, profiled and serious, gazed at the dark horizon line, engrossed in licking its shiny saliva with its flexible grey tongue from a charuto cigar. A musky scent of dried grass and cow dung rose up to the room. Country flute players frowned angrily, playing very crude instruments made from mamacero stalks. Melancholic moos of cows calling for their calves mingled with these simple bucolic melodies, vibrating through space in soft propagations that grew larger and larger until they disappeared into the air like a feeble sigh of extreme tenderness. And from the horizon line, which receded very far over the dark blue sky, night slowly emerged, majestic and tranquil in its seductive grandeur. The old man wiped away his tears and began to speak. As you know, 2 days had passed since your beloved mother left us. Until now, I do not understand how it was possible for me to resist this misfortune, which at first I thought capable of taking my existence from me. For 3 years I remained confined in this room, without visiting our farms, without receiving anyone, simply enjoying your innocent caresses, a pale reflection of those great embraces your idolized mother bestowed on me constantly. After these 3 years, I realized that the future demanded that I impose silence upon my pain and tend to our belongings so as to provide you with a good education and, after my death, make you the heir to a fortune sufficient for your maintenance. Thus I left the room, mentally asking the soul of your mother to accept this sacrifice as done out of love for you and consequently for her. My affairs required frequent trips to the villa where 23 years ago, when you were just 5, I met an Amazonian lady, the wife of an old friend of mine, a farmer from Chaves who lived in the villa. That lady was the living portrait of your mother. by a phenomenon of impressionism unwittingly and unconsciously became captivated by her graces until I thought your good mother had come back to life and loved me again, as before. Whenever I went to the villa, I stayed at that old companion's home. This prolonged convivence greatly intensified my love, transforming it into a great passion, full of enthusiasm and vehemence. The farms in Chaves made her husband often absent from the villa, leaving me alone with the woman. He hesitates, filled with shame, his eyes blurred with tears, his chest heaving, and his face contorted in visible agony caused by remorse. Finally, he said with energy, allowing his tears to flow even more intensely, the result of this criminal, this infamous and low passion was the birth of a girl which my old friend naively believed to be his daughter. And that girl is Venancia. Thiago asked, his eyes wide, his hair standing on end, his hands clenched tightly, feeling his spirit falter at the impact of such profound emotion. Yes, Thiago, yes, she is Venancia. He continued, the fruit of my infamy, the daughter of a traitor friend and a miserable wife who couldn't resist my temptation. She is Venancia, the woman you want to marry. By marriage. He paused, realizing the terrible truth. She's your sister, fool that you are. And he fell back hard, convulsed by gout, his usual malady, while his son rolled over on a bed of sheets, struck down by death, providentially freed from a life that would have been nothing but torment and unspeakable anguish henceforth. The lesson of the paleographer to Heliodor, Brito, I on that day, enslaved Josepha experienced a profound emotion. Her soul ached in anticipation of the triple bitterness of the severe blow her heart was about to receive from its most beloved motherly figure. Commander Pereira de Castro, who was leaving for Europe in a few days along with his entire family, had announced his decision to take little Isora, his beloved daughter, the mulatto girl he had raised as his own, with him on the upcoming journey. And she, the doting mother, bound to her daughter's tender love, the sole source of comfort in the gloom of captivity, despite the kindness shown by everyone, would be left behind in Para, separated from the little one who tore at her spirit with vivid chimeras of golden fantasies amidst. Here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho, the sad vegetariness of her existence. A profound sorrow tormented her soul and eyes, once deprived of tears under the cruel lash of her first master, before she was sold to old Pereira de Castro. The night before, after hearing the declaration in the morning, she wept silently for hours. Only the memory of such a brutal separation caused her such pain. What wouldn't raw reality be? But the commender, veiling her in a paternal embrace on the following day, with eyes filled with expressive complaints, fixed on the young girl, consoled her gently. He told her not to grieve, as she would return with him and his family in years to come. And how advantageous for her, he promised to bring her educated, refined, elegant and happy, a true lady. Even Josepha, he thought, would then regret her current foolishness, recognizing the benefits she had wanted to bestow upon her daughter. For was it not true that everyone there treated them so well, mother and daughter, and that she was considered less an innocent than as if she were truly born from the commander's marriage with his wife? Josepha trusted in her masters, and the future would show her exuberantly the justice of her actions. These words somewhat calmed the feverish agony of the slave. However, erasing it from her soul was impossible, for a mother's heart could not bear to lose her dearest treasure, stolen by fate in any of its innumerable manifestations, without causing frauzinke, frank delusional tremors in the most intense pain. The family's journey, the family of Commander Pereira de Castro set off on their travels, taking with them young Isora. Josefa, the slave transported to the peak of immense and silent affliction, seemed not to live since her daughter left. The other slaves would see her silently traverse the empty chambers, oblivious of everything, gazing ahead as if trying to catch a glimpse in the limited horizona, unique vision created just for her, drawing her gaze powerfully and absorbing all her living forces of spirit and reason. A surprise. After 3 years, one day, 3 years later, the commander's partner summoned Josefa urgently. She responded indifferently, without any concern or eagerness in her facial expression, as if accustomed to thinking and acting according to someone else's will. The partner and procurator, old Castro, handed a letter with a smile. Josefa's heart beat erratically upon receiving the paper. That letter could only be from her, the commander, periodically writing to his partner, always requested updates on the health of his daughter, who was growing up well and progressing rapidly in her studies. She tremblingly held the letter and gazed long at the man, smiling gently and compassionately at her. "Go ahead, read it," he said. "It's a letter from your daughter, written by her own hand." Tears of joy streamed down Josefa's face. An indescribable joy gave her heart-precipitous leaps. Yet she remained immobile before the white paper, gazing at it as if wanting to say something. He seemed to understand. "Do you want me to read it for you?" "Yes, sir," Josefa replied, quickly handing him the letter and preparing herself. To hear her, to savour the transcendent taste of her senses, the divine music ignored in the sweet words written by the child's hand, that is what the partner of Castro read. "My dear mother, I write to you from Paris, where I am learning at a college, and from whom I send thousands of kisses in this letter, the first that I have written with my own hand, to tell you, if I could, the many misses I have for my holy mother, and the great desire I feel to study hard, so that I can return quickly to where my heart's mother is. The day before yesterday marked my 10th birthday, and my protector offered me a beautiful golden pen, telling me that with it I should write to you, my good mother. I have been strolling around a lot and thoroughly enjoying this beautiful city, where my joy would be complete if you were here beside your daughter. Bless me and receive 1,000 kisses from Isora." Paris, December 30, 1887. Josefa wept, her sobs echoing, when she heard the name that concluded the Latimer banner lines filled with trite phrases, yet possessing the great merit of coming from her beloved Isora. It was May 13, 1888. The streets of Pa had a festive air, overflowing with joyful people celebrating the news of the law that abolished slavery in Brazil. In the sky there was a blur of large fireworks, while thousands of voices echoed with enthusiastic praises and cheers in honor of the glorious success. Banners and streamers adorned the streets. Marching bands filled the space with cheerful harmonies from warm hymns. From the home of Commander Pereira de Castro, all the blacks rushed into the street to claim their rightful share in the general celebration. Yet someone remained indifferent to the sounds of a public joy. A black woman sat in the kitchen, peeking out from every corner, fearing she might be caught. When she was certain she was alone, she etched a spiritualized smile on her purple lips, and, taking an old paleograph from her bosom, opened it to the first pages, murmuring with emotion, "Let's study the lesson. Manduduka," she said. "By next month I should be able to read my little girl's letter. when that day comes, O God. And she bowed her head over the book in the stubbornness of strong wills triumphant. At 8 o'clock in the evening, when her husband arrived, Candida leapt joyfully to greet him at the door of the balcony, dragging along the long, fringed tail of her white cambric com. How long he had taken. Why didn't he come back sooner? Her Candida was already so homesick, she couldn't imagine what it felt like to be a poor woman cooped up at home all afternoon without the sight of her beloved husband, her adored friend. She embraced him affectionately, stroking his hair from the top of his head, causing sensual shave at his back, raising goosebumps on his arms and legs. How she wished he could come sooner, objected her husband, sitting in a chair and smoothing his sleek black beard with a glance of lust for his wife. I've made every effort, he said, as uselessly. They would find them having dinner, still in the beginning. He had to wait in the garden for half an hour, playing with the children, to pass the time. The little ones are incredibly mischievous. They stained his white pants with their grazy hands. After that, he went to the living room to talk to Dr. Martins and his wife. And did they accept? Asked Candida, jumping onto her husband's legs, laughing loudly, with her lips wide open, showing off gracefully and displaying her tiny white teeth like a jasmine. What? They told me they wouldn't sell the slave for any amount of money, even knowing that we wanted her to be free. That people is getting darker and darker. Anyway, choose anyone else, as long as it's a fitting way to celebrate your anniversary. I was about to leave, well dressed with Dr. Martins, when Corino arrived, the old Corino, that reddish fellow, whose head is cleaner of hair than your knees. Stop talking nonsense. He pulled me down onto some murky ground, which lasted until now, and that's because I got up and left forcefully. Now, he concluded with a smile, here you have your Roberto, full of love and passion, ready to make up for his absence, with a long, loud kiss, wanting her very much, willing to do everything she desires. Candida sat on top of his legs, her eyes half closed in a dizzying lubricant, and extended her fresh, perfumed lips towards Roberto's mouth. But suddenly they embraced. Little Eusebio appeared at the door leading to the corridor, holding a teapot. After tea, Roberto lit up a cigar, grabbed a book, and settled into a large Voltaire chair, starting to read. Candida stood in front of him, staring. A breeze from the garden, filled with perfumes, shook the lights of both gas lamps enclosed in finely crafted crystal globes. With her elbows on the table, her chin prominent, and her nostrils flaring in her palm, Candida continued to look at her husband with an odd, soft expression, permeated by tenderest caresses. It seemed as if she were lost in contemplating her own happiness. That was exactly what her daydreaming imagination, a spoiled, bourgeois girl pampered by overly doting parents, had fantasized years before to live honestly with a handsome and good-hearted husband, to always be by his side, to console him in all troubles, to laugh with him during moments of joy, to be faithful to him without reproach, and most importantly, to look at him silently and for long periods, wrapped in the sentimental softness of her Creole lover's languid gaze. She had never felt so happy as after her marriage to Roberto almost 10 months ago. Not a single contradiction had arisen since that moving night, when she received the groom's first kiss in the quiet embrace of a discreet alcove filled with flowers, lace, ribbons, and perfumes. And with what joy, with what childish glee, she did not feel upon reading the following lines in the Diario de Noticias the very next morning, which she memorized. Here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho, repeating it softly. He said yesterday evening in the Church of Nazareth, Mr. Roberto da Silva Pereira, a respected merchant from our town, and His Excellency Mrs. Day, Candida Annunciada Seixas, daughter of our friend Mr. Pandolfo Seixas, a very wealthy owner, were married. The sponsors were Mr. Silvino Cunha and Anthero de Mendonça, along with their consorts. We wish these young spouses a bright future filled with the happiness they deserve due to their distinct qualities. She was elated, her whole being flushed with joy at seeing her name in the newspapers, deeply moved by the memory that at that very moment the entire town knew of her realization of her dearest wishes as a passionate young woman. From then on, they began to live as two angels, as she had wanted. Roberto was always tender and serious with his Candina, who also, let's admit it, contributed to making his life smooth and happy. She thought it impossible for two people who loved each other as brides to argue, after marriage, give me a break. Nevertheless, that sometimes happened. Here in Par, there was D. Clotilde, who, according to malicious tongues, was a snake to her husband. Pedro de Andrade, the husband of D. Estefania was another. He spent his life in gambling houses, got drunk. When he arrived home, he would abuse his wife, who was truly a heartach. But that didn't happen with her, thank God. Roberto was punctual like a collector at the designated time to return home at 5 p.m. He would close the warehouse, take the bond, and immediately come to be with her, staying by her side until the next morning, so as to go back to work. He had continued living like this. She knew her husband's character well enough not to fear any future changes. Now, especially, Roberto was going to be stuck with a big surprise from her lips. It was true. She needed to tell him everything. But how? Shame constricted her throat as soon as she opened her mouth to speak. However, today she was resolved. When now? Well, not now. Let him enjoy his reading. He's so engrossed. Sooner or later, when they would go to bed. Oh, how satisfied Roberto would be. What a pleasure for her who was so beautiful, so good, so beloved. She thought all this while continuing to gaze at her husband in an enraptured state. From time to time, glancing away from the book to shake off the ash from his cigar, Roberto would look at his wife with a kind smile. Surprised, Candida would tilt her beautiful head forward, feigning to read from a book on the table. Then, after she thought her husband was still reading, she would return to fix her ardent gaze on her face, as if she wanted to cover it with all the vehemence of passion. At 10 p.m., the bells of Santa Ana rang, and Roberto closed his book. "Shall we sleep?" he proposed. Candida trembled and stood up. The young man went to close the doors and windows and turn off the gas. However, they were both already inside, in the small alcove, atop a vela cushion, a pink sail burned in a porcelain candle holder from S.A. Vraz, adorned with allegorical paintings of winged loves and flying chimeras. In the center, a blue velvet sofa was piled high with bows, lace bodies, scattered brochures, in an adorably asymmetrical disarray. Glass jars from perfumeries with crystal rollers glistened on a jackfruit dressing table, casting flickering reflections onto the entire length of the large wardrobe that stood against one of the side walls. In the background rose a bed modestly hidden between the folds of a thin curtain, suspended from the ceiling by a golden runner. A sense of ethereal happiness seemed to emanate from it, seeping into the spirits of the newlyweds through their senses of smell and sight. To Candida in particular, this place held a transcendent importance. It evoked a bittersweet memory that made her smile warmly after 9 months of delightful conjugal cohabitation. As they prepared for bed, Candida wrapped a bare head in her husband's arms, only lightly covered by a short cambric nightgown adorned with lace from Seir. Roberto kissed her skin, inhaling the warm effluvs, those beloved exhalations of a loved woman in a passion and languor. "Look," she murmured, maintaining her position and kissing him on the forehead. "I have something very good to tell you." "What is it?" Roberto asked, tightening his embrace. "I'm ashamed," she exclaimed, breaking free from his hold and jumping onto the bed. "Come on, talk," he said playfully. "What's this silly game?" "First, turn off the light," she replied, sitting up. "Maybe in the dark I'll feel bolder." Roberto extinguished the candlelight. Lying down, he said Candida remained silent for a moment, stroking her husband's forehead with the tips of her trembling fingers. Then, suddenly, "I'm pregnant," she exclaimed, and their bed shared a resounding, prolonged kiss, fiery as the flames of great love with which the husband tried to reveal the indescribable joy of seeing his most persistent desire realized. At the commander's ball, Mr. Elderico Souza Dura. "Mikado, I doubt the sincerity of your words," and beautiful Arcelina covered her scarlet lips, slightly parted in a mocking smile, with the finest lace of her canary yellow fan made of pearl rods. "Why not tell me?" he insisted, leaning forward in his chair and sizing up her partially visible breasts through the crystal of his imposing monocle. "Why?" she replied with a short burst of laughter, locking eyes with him, speaking over her left shoulder, dusted with a lingering velvet fragrance. "Because life is a good teacher, Doctor, and I've received some very harsh, very cruel lessons from it, even at your age." He asked. "Life doesn't choose its students among those who present a bald head. On the contrary, it seems to give preference to the young sometimes, compensating them for their lack of precise discernment in knowing and avoiding the trials of fate. But it is marvelous what your divine lips are telling me with the angelic music of your voice. My dear lady, if I did not already feel this indomitable affection for you, and your spirit, as I mentioned to you briefly earlier, I believe I should experience it now, and deeply after hearing so reasonable and unexpected words from you, truly." "Of course." "Oh!" "It is very kind. I speak the truth. Yet I still disbelieve. That does much harm. Why?" "Ah, you already ask questions. Because whoever confesses disbelief in such a matter desires to believe, or at least does not want to disbelieve, which comes to the same thing, you heard. However, in applying this general rule to me, Doctor, you rarely mistake women like me be convinced. The world has been a great school for me, Dr. Mikado. I have received sharp lessons from it, and now, without discordance from your opinions, I will make you believe in your own fanciful illusions. For I am convinced that you do not take seriously the banalities of the confession that your lyricism just sang to me. Are you perhaps so enamored with yourself that you consider yourself irresistible, fatal, vain self-admiration? Doctor, how cruel, my lady! I am not cruel. No, sir, sorry. I am merely just... And because I sympathized inexplicably with you, I desire to work to extract from your spirit that unreasoning pride that obscures your feelings. Allow me the freedom of frankness." "Of course. Why not? Very well, I aim to kill in your soul its limitless pedantry, as you say. Listen carefully, your limitless pedantry. But, look, sit here next to me like this. We will converse peacefully while that Offenbach gang absorbs all the attention in the room. Listen to me. I was a girl, just 10 years old, a simple, insignificant child. It was 9 o'clock at night. The rain had been falling non-stop since dark, a sad winter rain that gave us goosebumps under the flickering light of the gas lamp. We were gathered on the veranda, about 10 people, me, my 2 sisters, some slaves, and an old black woman, very old and bent, torn from the African savannas by the slave trade and transplanted in Brazil. Some were sewing, others making lace. My 2 sisters and I played with the broom, forming a circle around the table where the slaves worked. Suddenly, a silence fell over the entire veranda, and we stopped our game while the girls raised their heads, pausing their needles or carefully setting down their beading on the pillows where they were beginning their lacework. Old Euphrasia announced she was going to tell a story about the cabinage, which was enough to guarantee our absolute tranquility. Because let me tell you right away, Euphrasia was an authority on the subject. Her storytelling had something lugubrious, poignant, and in accord with a certain truthful quality, and very expressive in the sequence of events and the immediacy of her note, whether epic or bucolic, that she intended to capture our listeners' attention. Everyone settled in closer, their eyes fixed on the old woman, illuminated by a strange flash that seemed the final reflection of the bellicose times she was about to describe. Established the most complete silence, as much as it was possible to obtain with the noise of the rain falling on the roofs. The good old man Roofs began to recount the small story that I am about to relate to your attentive kindness, concisely, so as not to annoy you with reckless delays. On the other side of the river, at the left margin of this very Godard that rolls its turbid waters at the feet of Belém, there was a farm in those days, in 1835, that served as shelter for a simple family of modest farmer caboclos, a father, a mother, and a son, a slender youth in the full vigor of healthy and well-developed 20 years old. They all lived in the most joyful happiness they could hope for in their mediocre simplicity as moderate farmers. The flour from their farm was the most renowned at the market square in Belém, and their serious way of conducting business had earned them a wide credit with their correspondent in town. The young man, Anicito, was happily married to Tomasia, a girl from the opposite side of the river, who lived on a property almost bordering the farm. By St. John's Day they were supposed to come to the provincial capital and make before a priest the most persistent aspiration that had never pulsated in the Amazonian hearts, and which gave them, just thinking about it, an Olympic-like euphoria of transcendent fortunes. Once a week, on Saturdays, Anicito's small horse would gallop with vigor through the clear waters of the river, transporting him happily to his beloved's tiny home. They would spend whole hours of intense contentment next to each other, weaving together the graceful outline of her cheerful existence yet to come, when, alone in their room, with intertwined hands and their gaze lost afar, they would indulge in building illusions in the bloom of wide, admirable fantasies. A similar existence seemed blessed by heaven itself in its merciful joy at witnessing such a radiant passion. But one day, fate, always cruel and cynical, Doctor, seemed to want to mock the general opinion about that enviable happiness of 2 blissful lives. The Cabanagem, a form of local rebellion, was raging in this part of the province. The fierce guerrilla warfare of the insurgents swept through blood-stained towns and farms, seeking and making victims everywhere with impudent audacity. Under such circumstances, Tomasia's parents' home could not escape the visit of these heartless rebels. The house underwent the most brutal violence that can be imagined against a young woman, and Tomasia's parents, for having tried to dissuade them from this infamy, after witnessing the savage atrocity without being able to defend themselves, suffered the ultimate penalty, hanging face to face from two branches of a somber sumac tree. Anicito and his parents escaped the rebels' rage by taking the refuge in the depths of the forest. They had witnessed what was happening at the neighboring farm, and not even for a moment did the young man, that very morning's ardent lover, feel a spark of revenge against the insult they had received. Here is the translation of the text, preserving the name Carvalho bride. Admire the sincerity of that passion, Doctor, just days before presented in lipstick flourishes of fantastic idyllic throes. What a great heart that of that man! He fled poltroonishly, filled with fear, without a shred of remorse that, condemning his indignity, would have sent him to die at the place where they had insulted his bride, without tearing out guts of one of those abject infames, even when he was certain he'd be torn to pieces by the assassins' mob. Years later, when peace had been established in the province, Euphrasia found him at home, quite satisfied and cynical, living with a taut mulatto animated by a life of coarse, materialistic indulgences. He could still laugh, still sing songs to the sound of his cavaquinho, but across from the field, once so flourishing, had turned into a jungle, and wretched Tomasia, apathetic and aged, covered in rags and tears, had merely as a witness to her misfortune a unaware child, a son who within her sowed the horrible savagery of the rebels. The beautiful Arcelina, out of breath and blushing, stood silent for a moment, gazing intently at Dr. Mercado's face. Then, opening her yellow canary fan, stirring it slowly with a certain dignity of a victorious sovereign, she asked, smiling ironically, "And do you still believe, after all this, that I believe in the existence of even one honest man, and truly in love, capable of carrying out all these wordy lies that Missa, name redacted, sang for her, notes on the convalescent?" She was looking at the sheet containing this small sketch boldly dedicated to Da. Alves da Costa, when driven by base intrigues and regarding some phrases about him expressed by me in a critical study of João Dorigo's first rhymes, he broke off with me in an article overly aggressive, personal and rancorous. I didn't then want to scratch the name that friendship had so happily inscribed on one of the pages of my book, and today, to prove my loyalty, I presented, it was given to me by the press before his unexpected outburst. What are you, husbandi? This tale was rejected in December 1885 by Rio de Bellum, declaring it immoral. However, that same exaggerated zeal unfortunately lagged when newspapers from the South and the scissors gave them an opportunity to print Catil Mendes' immoral works. This is the most flagrantly poor case of criteria and coherence I have ever encountered. The following day, a Providencia do Par published this work, incongruent este, or why. This narrative was published in 1887 by Arena, the unfortunate man of letters to whom I had the honor of dedicating my work, still existed, and for that reason I received from him a flattering, very affectionate and benevolent letter. Index pages Golet, Joy 10, Convalescent 21, Disillusion 23. Sanata, by Schubert 33, what a husband. 45 Night of the Dead, 55 Rio Blau 61, at dawn 69 Prose Poemets. I Bet It In 81, I Oceanic, Paris is 84, I The Village Priest, A6 IV, To the Sun 89, Remember 91, The Price of Peace 95, Incongruent, Story 109, Lesson of Paleograph 119, Sailing by Velt 127, at the Commendators Ball 137, 147 corrections. The most notable errors are: here is the translation, preserving the name Carvalho, following pages. Liner Amendment 61.5, signature pen 93.15, embarrassingly entangling us, inbounding 93.33, extended 107.33, inquired 114.29, wavering briefly. The new novel by Marcos de Sora Mariana will be published. It is a grand descriptive canvas of Para's customs and serves as relief to one of the most notable contemporary scandals. The work will form a substantial volume of 300 carefully printed pages. End of Project Gutenberg's by João Marques de Carvalho. It is a grand descriptive canvas of Para's customs and serves as relief to one of the most notable contemporary scandals. The work will form a substantial volume of 300 carefully printed pages. End of Project Gutenberg's by João Marques de Carvalho.